Hello everybody and welcome to another edition of OTH Sports View. I'm JP Butler alongside Shawn Campbell. Today another Big 30 football edition of the program. For the second straight week, it was kind of a one-sided weekend, more blowouts than great games. Certainly out of the 22 teams in the Big 30, 16 were involved in games that were decided by 3 scores or more. 14 out of our 22 teams were in games that were decided by 31 points or more, and it kind of seems to be an increasing number even as the weeks go by. But also for the second straight week, there were a couple of gems in there as well, one of which you covered in Olean High's home opener against Dunkirk at Bradner Stadium. This was a game the Huskies were able to pull out 20-14 at the end of the game. Another one touchdown victory for the Huskies following their win over Allegheny Limestone a week earlier. Shawn, same kind of question I asked you last time. In such a close game like that, where it was decided by kind of a touchdown, in the second half, what was the difference for Olean? I know just in judging, off your game story, there was a sequence at the end of that game that sort of led to Olean being able to pull that one out. What happened in that one?
I mean, with about 3.5 minutes left, you're looking at it as, the game's up for grabs, and maybe even the momentum's on Dunkirk's side. They had the ball in Olean territory just inside midfield, driving, had a third down play. Dylan Vincent comes up with a huge sack to push them back and force them to punt, basically. Then on the punt, the snap is bobbled a little bit by Dunkirk's punter. He's pushed back to the 25. Olean swarms and tackles him. Huskies take over. And 2 plays later, Garrett Bolt finds Derek D'Andrea from 24 yards out. He's wide open in the end zone for the game-winning touchdown. Just a huge swing there, just in about 2 minutes.
That takes a potential loss. We've heard from a couple of guys, as you said, that Dunkirk did have some momentum there late, and it was just kind of completely flipped, I think, and within that sequence to give Olean High the win. This is an Olean team now that is off to a 2-0 start after winning just 2 games total last season. Mm-hmm. With the win over Dunkirk, that's their first league victory since early in the 2014 season. So something really, I think, kind of even a mental thing to have to be able to get that monkey off their back, so to speak.
Yeah.
What have they done over these first 2 weeks so far? And granted, it wasn't easy, maybe it wasn't pretty at times, just being able to kind of get by 1 touchdown in both games over Allegheny Limestone and then Dunkirk. But what have they done well? You've seen them in person both times that has kind of allowed them to get off to the kind of start that they have.
I guess one main thing would be they're finding ways to win late in games, which is kind of obvious, but they're making some big plays too. In the opener, Garrett Bolt had a couple of big 4th down completions, one for a touchdown, and they scored 2 times in that game, so one was on 4th down. Then last week against Dunkirk, they come up with a big play on the punt, kind of taking advantage of a mistake, but still there to make the play. Another thing that stood out to me was Dunkirk takes a 6-0 lead in the first half, and after Olean gets the ball, Dylan Vincent runs 70 yards on the first play from scrimmage to tie it up. Then he kicks the extra point to give them the lead. So they get down, but it didn't really bother them. They bounced right back to take the lead. And this Dunkirk team, too, was pretty highly regarded. In their first week of the season, they lost at Cheektowaga 27-13, but Cheektowaga was the unanimous number 1 in the Western New York Small School poll, and that performance actually earned Dunkirk some votes in that poll too. So a league win for Olean, and a pretty good one too.
Right, nice, victory, and maybe something that really gives them something to maybe build on going forward, which I think is something they really haven't had in the last couple of years. Maybe not since that 4-0 start a couple of years ago have they had something legitimate to kind of build on, maybe give them some momentum going forward. One of the names I've seen a lot of across these first 2 games is Dylan Vincent. You mentioned him on both sides, but certainly just as a kind of a feature back that they maybe don't. There are a lot of years where they spread things out, they throw the ball a lot. He seems to be a guy that they can rely on for big yards, big plays. Just a good overall football player that a lot of it seems to be stemming from him, certainly from what Bolt has done at quarterback, but from Vincent as well. What have you seen out of him?
He's just got tremendous speed, and he can just bust a play for a touchdown, it seems like, at any time, which can be a big concern for the defense, obviously. The thing with him last year, he sprained his ankle in the first series of the first game, and I guess he just never was 100% after that, too, which was pretty frustrating. I think a lot of people on that team think he would have had a pretty big year last year, too, and maybe we're seeing what he's really capable of now.
Switching over to a couple of the other few real good games we had over the weekend. One kind of right down the street in Portville and Randolph. For the second straight week, we had an overtime game. This is a game Portville loses 19-13 in overtime. They had an early 13-0 lead against Randolph, which was very interesting to see after losing 52-15 last week to Maple Grove, really being handled in that game. They seem to be able to shrug that off. They get the early lead on Randolph. Randolph's able to tie it at the end of the game to force overtime. Randolph scores on its very first play of overtime, a pass from Jake Beaver to Dylan Williams, 20 yards. Portville gets the ball. They've got 4th and goal from the 4-yard line. They can't punch it in, so it ends in a tough loss. But still a pretty good showing, I think, after, like we said, being handled by Maple Grove, so badly, I guess, the week before.
Yeah, really a tremendous bounce back. I guess that's probably the most encouraged you could be in a loss, taking the Randolph to overtime. They hadn't beaten them since 2008. It remains to be seen if Randolph's the Randolph of recent years, but still probably a pretty quality team. Something to build off for Portville, I would say.
And like we said, maybe again some momentum for a team that I think certainly needed it after what happened in week 1. But again, just it shows you though that Randolph is could be a pretty tough team. Portville nearly knocks them off, but still we look at the top of that league, and there's still going to be some work to do there. We see Maple Grove at the top. Silver Creek actually beat Randolph pretty good the week before, and then Franklinville-Ellicottville's gotten off to a good start. Yeah. So really, I mean, that might be the toughest top of the league out of any of the ones that we cover.
Yeah, and the thing with Randolph too is, I mean, I believe 4 years ago they started 1-2, struggled a little bit, and then they went on to win the state championship too. It's always a team that seems to get better. I don't know if they'll be in the mix for that top sectional title, but I think they'll be a factor for some of these other quality teams there.
And we talk about Franklinville-Ellicottville. They weren't one of the, in one of the more competitive games. They've had 2 now where they've really taken it to their opponent. Last week it was 55-0 over Cat Little Valley. I think that was a game that was maybe 41-0 at halftime, and so that really gives you an idea of kind of how one-sided that one was. The interesting thing to me with Franklinville-Ellicottville is this was a team that won the Section 6 Class D championship last year. We knew, really by week 2 last year that they were going to be good, but a lot of those guys were seniors that they lose. One of the big ones, Tommy Easton, the quarterback, and so you're thinking, can they really, duplicate that again this year, given, I mean, they had 5 Big 30 All-Stars. I think they lost 4 of them. Hutchinson coming back on the line. And so you think, can they really be that good again? They might be, because they bring in Brock Bleacha, who played a couple of different positions. He was a running back. He's a good defensive player, to be their quarterback this year. And it seems they really haven't missed a beat. I've heard great things about him from committee members about being the real deal. In that game on Friday, he was 5 for 5, 137 yards and 2 touchdown passes, and really just kind of guided the linchpin to the whole thing. This is a team that might be maybe as good as they were last year.
Maybe better. Who knows? I guess we'll find out. I mean, it's really shaping up for them too. They play at Frewsburg this week in a rematch of last year's sectional championship game. But then in the second half of their schedule, they have to play the Maple Groves, Silver Creeks, Randolphs. It sounds like that could be pretty difficult week after week too.
Right, and then maybe that's where we really get the idea of just how good they are. But certainly, I mean, it looks like they really haven't missed a beat to this point. They have some guys last year who were certainly contributors, but maybe, you know, kind of in the shadow of a Tommy Easton or a Caleb Rinko, who we know is a Big 30 All-Star, and Austin Grinnells and Griffin Schutte, who now are stepping up, and they're main guys this year, and they're doing a really good job so far.
Solid athletes in other sports too. I mean, maybe this is just an example of a team reloading from a big year.
Right. Another team along those same lines is Cuba Rushford. This is a team that, again, last year was one of the best teams in the Big 30. They lose some guys. They lose arguably the best player, probably the best running back in the Big 30 in Jake Jones. And again, so far, only 2 weeks in, you know, they really haven't missed a beat from last year. They had a big decisive victory in week 1, and then last week another one, 51-20 over York Pavilion. And we kind of mentioned it last week, but they've got a guy, same with, you know, Bleacha filling in for Easton. They've got this Trevor Smith, who's seemingly filled right in for Jake Jones. He had, I think, 5 touchdowns in week 1 and another 4 this past week. So it seems like they might be, you know, kind of in the same mold that they were last year. But as you mentioned, their biggest test probably coming up this week.
Yeah, they have Avon at home. Avon was the only team to beat them in the regular season last year. I believe it was an 18-6 game. And Avon's 2-0, Cuba Rushford's 2-0. I've got to imagine Cuba Rushford's going to be pretty fired up for this game, playing at home. Really, I mean, I think this is probably a statement game for them, just to show how good they are.
Right. I mean, we certainly think that Cuba Rushford will again be towards the top of the Big 30 again this year, and there's probably a couple of more decisive victories along the way. But this is the game where it's like, can you actually compete to win the league title and maybe a higher seed in those Class D playoffs?
It seems like this is what it's going to come down to. The only other 2-0 team in that league is Letchworth, Warsaw. They'll play them eventually too. But you have to think, just given last year, that this is the game for them.
Right. And certainly a couple others. You know, Kane, obviously, are the number one, unanimous number one in our large school poll. Franklinville, Ellicottville, number one in the small school poll. Kept it rolling last week, as did, you know, the rest of the AML South. I feel like we've gone into that whole dynamic ad nauseum over the weeks and over the last couple of years. They've got one more week playing the crossover games before the AML starts playing the interdivisional games, and that's where we'll see what will happen with a Kane, a Kerwinsville, a Bradford High, you know, who shook off a surprising loss to Coudersport with a very convincing victory over Cameron County. And how that division will shake out down there. And we'll start to get a better idea in week 3 how real some of these teams are. Can Olean High keep it going? They've got Fredonia, Westfield, Brockton. That's one that you might be doing. You think they've got a pretty good chance maybe of getting out to 3-0?
Yeah, Fredonia, Westfield, Brockton's 1-1. They had a non-league game last week. They beat Cassadaga Valley Faulkner on the road. Week 1, they were handled by Springville, which is they appear to be the class of that league so far. They won it last year. They've won big a couple times. But it seems like this is a game, maybe it's a game that's another one-score game for Olean too, that comes down to the end where they're really in a position to win.
Right. And we're hoping, you know, as a whole, maybe just a better, more competitive week, you know, in the Big 30 next week. Things have been pretty one-sided, but I think we're, you know, sort of shaping up for some better league games moving forward. And so we will be back next week to touch on those, and at the end of this week with a look at the Buffalo Bills after their game against the Jets on Thursday night. Possibly could consider to be a must-win already here, only in week 2 with what they have going forward, but we will get into that after the game on Thursday. Thank you for watching.